I just want to share this little tip with you. It's what I call speed cutting. So you take your template, and I've got 4 layers of fabric, and you're going to line it up. Hold it with your hand. Make sure that you have a little extra room off the edge so you don't cut it short. And then I just do this. I usually do 8 layers at a time, but I'll just do 4. Depends on how sharp your scissors are. All right. And now this obviously isn't for fussy cutting, but here's my 4 pieces, speed cutting. Now let's talk about glue basting the little shapes E and F. Now you already know there's a right and a left hand, but you've already cut the fabric, so you can't glue baste the opposite fabric. Well, I don't think you would. So you can't mess up from here on out. And you can just flip over the papers. They're universal. All right, so this is what I do. I line up my paper on the shape. I take my little embroidery scissors and I make 4 cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4. I leave about 1/8 of an inch of fabric at the curve, and I will glue baste this long straight edge first to stabilize. And I always like to try to find those points. Get that down. All right, and next I'm going to come around and do that curve. I probably put a little more glue on than I normally do for this curve. And then I just bring it up without pulling the fabric. Make sure you don't pull too much of that because you got to wrap it around. Okay. And then I'll show you why there's a special order. And then I do the outside curve. Again, trying to find that point or intersection, and then I'm just wrapping, trying to get a nice round curve. And then I'll find this edge. Gets a little tricky. There it is. I feel it. Okay. And there's my shape. And I'm going to show you why this is important. Let me just get my other pieces, put my cap on my glue pen. Okay, so I've already done these. And it's important to glue that way because after you make your little rosette blocks, your little flower blocks, this is how you're gonna assemble the quilt pieces. All right. So there's this intersection. There's a rosette here and there's a rosette here. And when you join them together at the end, there's a lot of bulk here. So I like it when there's not a lot of tails in the middle here. So I folded them down. And it's a little easier to sew these 3 pieces together. And now there's no bulk when I attach these 2. Okay. Let's glue baste shape C. Again, here's these curves. Again, this is not beginner quilt. I like to do 4 cuts. I'll leave maybe a little more than 1/8 or 1/8. 3, 4. Okay. So I'm going to start off with the curve on this one. I do put a little glue on the fabric there. and up here as well. And then I kind of start in the middle. Okay, that worked well. And then I flip around, same thing. And try to catch that little edge there at the very tip. Get underneath, and you don't really have to pull the fabric. I'm just pressing down really hard. And then let's continue down here. And look at this guy, and then I'll show you what I do. Cap on, pressing to get those points. Okay, and there's a little give here, but because this is on a curve and a bias, this will iron out all at the end, so you don't need to worry about that. But what I do, never cut off your tails, but this tail's a little long, so I'm just gonna snip him. All right, and that is shape C. Let's talk about the stitches that you're going to use to assemble and stitch. I like to use the flat back stitch, and you can see that in our video tutorials on the site. But a lot of you are also traditional stitchers, and I have maybe a solution where you can use both. Curves are great for the flat back stitch because what you're doing is putting the pieces together flat, and then you just stitch around the curves. So it's a pretty easy assembly. So curves and the flat back stitch are a perfect marriage. Now, if you are a traditional stitcher, you might want to put your pieces together like you normally do on the straight pieces, but maybe when you get to the curves, you would do the flat back. So I'm thinking maybe you could use both to make your life a little bit easier. Let's talk about these little unusual shapes. They are outside of the little, it's like a flower petal is what I call it, but it's E and F. And it's really just a mirror image of the same shape. But to save you from confusing things, I've given you two templates labeled differently, E and F. So just make sure when you're cutting that you do half of F and half for E, all right? And the templates are there to help. Now this is inside curve is a little hard to cut with the rotary cutter. So there's a little warning there, and I'll show you how I do it. I'm going to speed cut half of these. So I'm going to get 4 layers together. I can cut the outside curve. That's no problem. All right. Then I get to here, and I just kind of get around and leave a little extra because I'm going to mark it in a second. Okay. And this is the shape I said would be really hard to fussy cut. If you want to do it, I think it would be great. I'd love to see it. So I get that going. All right. And I line that back up. I'm taking my fabric pen. You can use a pencil pen, whatever works best for you. And then I just cut those last little curve here. And that's how I cut those. If you have that little teeny rotary cutter, the little blade, oh, I can see I need to crisp that up a little bit. I think I missed that mark. Anyways, so you see there's half and half as far as the amount, but you might try the little teeny rotary blade. I don't have one because I wouldn't use it all that much, so I just prefer to do it this way. Here's a little tip on how to sew that 8-pointed star together and get things to line up. So essentially what you want to do is do 2 halves, because that center has got 8 shapes coming together and it gets very bulky and unruly and things don't line up. So sew half of it. So 4 shapes together and then the other 4 together. Make sure that you're alternating if you're doing that. So I line it up beforehand and then stitch it together. And you'll see that when you line it up like this, you'll be able to stitch that final seam and you'll be able to line everything up better that way. So that's a quick little tip on the 8-pointed star. All right, now I would like to show you how to glue shape A. And this would, you can glue-based or thread-based, it's all the same. And I fussy cut this. I'm going to start at this curve. And I'm just folding up, and I like to get that point nice and accurate. And then I'm just folding that curve around. Kind of pulling, but not. So I'm not actually pulling the fabric out. I'm just like pressing it down really hard because you don't really want to stretch it. Then I turn it. I glue on the fabric a little. I'm going to try to just get that point so it's accurate. And then I'm coming around again. Same thing. Sometimes you can put it under a book, that works. Just run, and then I just do these. Again, I always try to get the points accurate. On some of the variations, I've added a little dot, and I want to show you how I do it. You take your paper, cut out fabric that is, maybe 3/8 bigger than the shape, than the circle, and then do a running stitch close to the edge of the outside of the fabric. Doesn't have to be perfect. Then I glue up the circle, and then I pull, and then I glue that down. So I have a knot at one end, and then I just pull it. Okay. You can you want to get the little points out, you can wiggle it. So I get to this point, and maybe I see that's a little bit of a sharper point, then I can go in and work it a little bit better. Okay. And just add more glue. And at this point, I would take it to the iron and I would steam it. One more little point I don't like, so I'm going to take that out. Okay. And I'll take it to the iron and I'll show you what I've got. Okay, I have a little spray starch. And I've got the iron on pretty hot. And I'm just doing the front. And I'm going to get it over to the back. I still have the thread in. You can use sizing. Just ironing over that paper. nice and dry. I probably used a little heavy-handed, but that's all right. That's all right. And then I just go in and take the paper out. And I can reuse that. I just do another press. And I'm gonna actually leave the thread in. I don't even have to take that out, but I'll snip the little tail. And now you're ready to applique. And you can put dots anywhere. You could put one there, but I actually have mine there. And then you can applique that on.